many of you learnt a second language at school? Okay, which languages did you learn? I have to admit, I love languages. I also studied several languages at school: German, French, a bit of Latin, Spanish, and I then went on to study German and Italian ab initio at university. How many of you enjoyed your language classes at school? Okay, some of you. Not all.
Nothing.
That's fine. I didn't particularly enjoy my language classes at school either. However, as a teenager, I knew that I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to go and see other places. Having grown up in a rural, tiny little village in the middle of nowhere in Essex, in the southeast of England, I didn't want to stay there. I wanted to travel, so that was my motivation for learning other languages. Angela, you already mentioned about having an exchange experience with a French student. How many of you then used your French or German or Russian or Afrikaans with native speakers? Okay.
Yeah, I suppose so.
How did those interactions go? How successful were they? My first experience in Italy, I got to spend 6 months living in Italy as part of my studies on an Erasmus programme, and I lived with 2 Italian students who couldn't speak English, maybe could say hi, how are you, and that was it, which was great for my Italian. I learnt a lot in those 6 months. But the first few months, I spent so much time in my head preparing sentences, phrases, questions to ask whoever I was speaking to, and I'd then, okay, ask the question, whatever it was. They would respond, and I'd just be like, okay, I understood maybe half of what you said, or I understood the words, but I didn't really get the meaning of what they were saying in response to my question. Of course, because I prepared the question, I knew roughly what kind of information I was going to be getting, but you couldn't always predict what they were going to say or how they were going to respond to the question. Anyway, with a lot of patience on their part and mine, we managed to communicate well, and by the end of the 6 months, I could get by in Italian in most situations. I think anyone and everyone should learn another language. I think there are so many benefits that we can get from learning another language. That can be different cultures, different food, different arts, different music, and even as an adult I have continued studying other languages. My partner is bilingual in Welsh and English, and when we were living in Wales I studied Welsh. I've also been working with a charity called RefuAid to help refugees who are over here in the UK and help them with their English so that they can pass exams and go on to university. And I've been working with a lot of Syrian students, so I started learning some Arabic so that I could help them better, because I find that I don't need to know the language that my students speak to help them, but it helps me help them better if I know how the language works, pronunciation-wise, understanding which sounds can cause more challenges, perhaps, for certain speakers. So even without learning a second language, we can still get the benefits of other cultures by speaking with the people who are here in our local area. I know that it's not always easy communicating with people who have a different first language. So you've already mentioned some of the challenges that you had when you were trying to communicate, so maybe people spoke too fast, you didn't always understand the words that they were using perhaps, maybe they were speaking in dialect. When I was in Italy, every region had its own dialect, and I stayed in the north of Italy, but when I went down to the south of Italy, I couldn't understand anything. But I was really relieved to hear from my flatmates that they wouldn't understand someone speaking in dialect either. So someone from the north and someone from the south, if they both speak in dialect, it's not the same. They can't communicate with each other. They both have to go into standard Italian in order to communicate. How can we make communication easier? Do you guys have any thought? I'm sure we've all seen the little comic of someone going, "Do you want something?" Speaking louder and slower. This doesn't really work.
I get that all the time. Yeah, shouting definitely doesn't work.
I'd also like to now bring the conversation to this area. So in Clackmannanshire, about 3% of the population don't have English as their first language. So in a population of around 50,000 people, that means around 1,500 people don't have English as their first language. And actually, on top of that 3% of non-native English speakers, 5% of the population don't have full grasp of reading or writing or speaking or listening skills in English. Whether that's people who've grown up in families who have a different first language but consider English their first language because that's what they've been taught at school, or whether it's a lack of education in the area. That wasn't broken down in the census for me, that was the 2023 census. So when we're out in the community and communicating with people who are living here, they will have a basis of English, even if that is just hello, please, thank you. So how can we make it easier for them as native English speakers speaking with non-native English speakers? We can slow down, but that doesn't mean just making the words slower. We actually have to separate the words into individual words. Because when we have the words together, we actually add different sounds, we change the sounds as we speak fluently. Miming, body language, gestures, these are all really important ways that we can aid communication and understanding between people. Also making eye contact with people, making sure that they're following what you're saying, because very often if someone's just standing there smiling and nodding, it doesn't mean that they understand. And one of the things I've learned as an English language teacher, if you ask the question, do you understand? They will just say yes, even if they don't. Other ways you can find out whether they've understood is asking a question like, so what number bus do you need to get? Or where is the bus stop? Can you point me which direction you're going in? So just making the question more relatable to the information rather than just saying, do you understand or do you get it? Yeah. It makes it easier, it makes them more able to go, oh, okay, I know what I need to do next, or I know how to say that. And I'm not saying don't use dialect, because I think dialect is a really important part of our language. However, if you are communicating with someone from another country, maybe explain the word as well. If it's the first time you're speaking to this person, if they look a little bit blank. This is also the same with idiomatic expressions. We use them all the time, and it doesn't mean that they're bad or negative. They're good, they make our language more colourful, more beautiful and more interesting. But by explaining that language, they will then be able to have another conversation with another person. When they hear that word or phrase again, they go, oh, I remember this. They explained it to me, so now I can understand it or even use it in a future conversation. Idiomatic expressions are expressions that we use that probably, if you look at the words in them, don't make much sense, but they could be something like it's raining cats and dogs, or daft as a brush.
Yeah.
Someone who's really silly.
Yeah.
Another expression could be the pot calling the kettle black when you're being hypocritical. These are expressions that we use without really thinking about them. And once you start noticing them, you'll start picking up on, oh, we've used that expression several times this week. Some of them are outdated, some of them are things that my grandparents would say that I don't use anymore, but we still have a rich language of idiomatic expressions that are used in daily life. And so these expressions are hard to translate.
Yeah.
At the moment, technology isn't quite there with the language translation. Even the new AI, I don't know what number ChatGPT is on now at the moment, but even the paid versions, it finds it really hard to translate idiomatic expressions, it finds it really hard to translate humour, it finds it really hard to translate anything that is nuanced in the language. And so, yes, it can do a basic conversation. So if you just need to go and get a coffee or a beer or something from a local shop, you can probably get by with a machine doing the translating for you. But if you want to have an actual conversation with someone, it's not enough. You need to be able to have some of that personal interaction. And I know, Rosa, you said that your family got a TV when you were quite young. But the language learning doesn't happen through screens.
No.
So if you'd have just had the TV and no interaction with your siblings, you wouldn't have picked up English. So this is, going on another tangent, in schools all around the UK, kids are coming to school not being able to speak English or Scots or whatever language they're speaking because they've been sat in front of screens. And language learning, the brain cannot learn through a screen. It has to be that personal interaction. So that's the same with your first language or any second language that you're learning. You have to have that personal interaction. And I think this is the important thing about having these community events and being part of a community and understanding the language in that area. And as an English language teacher, so I've been teaching English for the last 15 years. I worked in language schools for the first 10, and for the last 4.5 I've been working for myself. And I love both experiences. But language schools and the ESOL classes that I've done at the colleges is very general, very generic. And yes, it's good for anyone who's starting out. But actually, if you come across as an adult and you have got a basis of English, they're probably not enough to get you past an intermediate level of English. You still won't get the humour. You still won't be able to have the deep conversations that maybe you wanted with your parents. Because you need to go that bit further with the language. And that's what I'm trying to do now with my business, is to help people who already have a good basis of the language, but take that next step into proficiency so that they feel confident with their pronunciation. And that's not to say that they need to lose their accent, because their accent is part of their identity, the same way dialect and accents around Scotland are part of your identity. Having a Spanish accent or French accent or German accent or Russian or Polish, it's all part of who you are. And so it's about making sure, as Chris said, that you feel totally comfortable and confident with that, and then being able to go, this is who I am, and still being able to have those conversations. I'm going to be running conversation sessions for non-native speakers of English at the Alloa Hub on alternate Monday afternoons between 1 and 2 o'clock, starting on the 3rd of February. I did run a couple of sessions before Christmas, but I'm hoping to get a little bit more interest. So if you know anyone who might be interested, it's not really aimed at beginners, it's aimed at people who already have some level of English. I do also offer online sessions for anyone who's interested in doing one-to-ones rather than a group session. I know some people find it a little embarrassing to admit that they want help